12 seconds. That is how long, on average, it takes your brain to process a positive experience. That means to really experience the good thing that's happening to you, you have to wait for all those electrical impulses to register in your noggin. You have to focus, be patient, hold on to that positive experience for a very long time. Truthfully, it's almost an eternity compared to how fast your brain works to register a negative experience. If a positive experience takes 12 seconds to compute, how long do you think it takes to process a negative experience? The answer is almost no time at all. It's almost instantaneous. So if someone calls you a Debbie Downer or a negative Neil, you say, no, my brain is just finely honed to capture and process negative experiences. My running buddy Chris has a brain that is finely honed for responding to the danger of snakes. Every once in a while we're running, we'll encounter a usually dead snake on the road. Once or twice, they've been alive, but truthfully, it doesn't matter. We'll inevitably be running along, not paying attention until we run right up on the thing. And dead or alive, his response is the same. It's like this uncontrollable reaction. His brain takes over for him. He shrieks, and his body goes into motion, jumping a superhuman amount up into the air. I, of course, then make fun of him mercilessly about it. But of course, you have to watch out for paybacks, because I am the same exact way about dogs. Now, in regular life, I'm not typically scared of dogs. I love dogs. But one time, just once, when I was running on Covington Street about 10 years ago, just this once, a dog got off its leash and got right in my face, and I thought I was toast. So now, anytime a dog runs at me while I'm running, I also have this automatic response. My brain takes over, and I push Chris toward the dog. Your brain is finely honed to capture and process negative experience. And it does this much, much better than positive ones. It's sort of in the back of your brain, the part that deals with the emotions. Negative experiences are dealt with immediately, and they are also quickly stored into long-term memory, it turns out. This is part of your brain's strategy to help you survive. If you think about it, you don't get many chances to learn dangerous lessons. And so it's like we don't even have to work at it at all or even think about it. Our brain just takes over, and that's that. But the exact opposite is true as we try to process all the good things around us. In fact, you have to have the same impact, you're going to have to focus essentially 12 times longer with good stuff. We sometimes talk about the negativity bias in the media, but the truth is that negativity bias is not in the media, it's in you. It's in me. It's in our brains. The issue is not out there in the world. It's in here, in us. And all of this adds up to mean simply this. We are going to have to be much, much more intentional about taking time to focus on the good things in our lives, just to stay even. If not, then here's what we should expect. We will naturally assume that the world is a worse place than it actually is. We will naturally decide that people are worse than they are. Especially in times of stress, we'll be easily overwhelmed by what seems to be all these things going wrong around us. And we will act and react out of a skewed view of reality. And this helps us understand what we mean by prayer and the spiritual life more broadly. In summary, prayer is simply those set of habits that retrain our brains to see the world as it actually is. Now, this is more than putting a positive spin on things, looking on the bright side of our lives. No, it is putting a truthful spin on things. Think of it that way. Prayer becomes a tool to help us see and live by the truth and not our skewed way of viewing things. It offsets our negativity bias so that we are more and more able to see what is real, what is right. There will at times be terrible and dangerous things, snakes and dogs, and sickness and tragedy, and even death in life. And we rightly feel those dangers intensely. That's not the struggle. But the struggle is, in fact, the other side of the equation, to see and feel and experience the good things at the right and appropriate level as well. And at the core of this, we experience God's good creation. By faith, we know that not even death can separate us from God. This is God's good creation. And if we don't experience that appropriately, then we're missing out on the essential side of life. At the core is an inherent goodness in people, actually, in us. And life itself has this basic fundamental goodness that we will miss if we simply don't learn how to see it. Without somehow holding on to the truth long enough, we'll miss the good right in front of us. And prayer is this holding. Prayer is a way in which we hold things appropriately, both the positive and the negative things. But prayer in this way is learning to respond appropriately to the world as it really is, and not as we perceive it to be. Said another way, what we mean by prayer is this set of habits that retrains our brains to fully experience God's good world. Frederick Buechner has said famously, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid." All this helps make sense of the pastoral advice that we find at the end of 1 Thessalonians. This letter is probably the earliest Christian writing we have. It was written before the Gospels or any of the other letters that Paul wrote to the churches. It is written to a group of Christians, and it references their hardships, their suffering, their mistreatment, the opposition that they have faced. There's also concern clearly in the letter within the community about believers who have died. What's more, it's been a while since Paul has been there, and so he has sent his protege, Timothy, back to them. And then Timothy has just returned to Paul with a positive report about the people. These folks are holding strong. They are remaining strong in faith and love. They are standing firm in the Lord, it says. So this advice at the end of the letter is for them to keep on keeping on, to not get bogged down. Gravity, John Mayer writes, is working against me, and gravity wants to bring me down. That's their experience. Paul is trying to hold them up. He's writing to these faithful people who and hopefully they will not be weighed down by life, but instead to keep their heads up, and encourages them to keep their hearts engaged. And this is the heart of the advice. It comes down to these 3 verses. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Now, at first glance, this sounds like advice to do the impossible. It uses words like always and continually and all things. And those kinds of generalizations are hard to keep up with. That sounds like a superhuman weight to carry, to pray all the time, to pray without ceasing. It sounds like a superpower none of us has. So we could read this passage to say, be happy all the time, never stop praying, be thankful and cheery even when life stinks. And to be sure, that idea of all and always really is there. It does sound like all the time. The comprehensive nature of what we're talking about is surely there. But whatever we're talking about here, it is all-consuming and all-encompassing. Yet, I think this pastoral advice is intended to be full of hope and possibility rather than to place on us an impossible burden. And this interpretation of that passage hinges actually on a single root word, which is used throughout the passage as well. And that word is gift, or as we would translate it, grace. Unlike in English, the root words in Greek for joy and gift and grace and thanksgiving are all the same word. Let me say that again. Unlike in English, the root words in Greek for joy and gift and grace and thanksgiving are all the same word. And so as we see this passage, we realize that it's really spinning the same idea. What this passage is calling us to is an awareness of the gift, to rejoice always. That joy, that the gift of life, the source of that joy is the grace that is at the root of everything. Rejoice always, in this sense, means to gain the ability to see and celebrate the gift of life, the grace that is our existence, the grace which is the ocean in which we swim. The advice to pray continually then is simply the natural response of the discovery of that grace, which permeates all things. Prayer becomes the way to hold that and to experience it and to let it sink in. Giving thanks then, that Eucharistic life, that life that is grounded in grace, that speaks grace, is simply us learning to speak from the overflow. So that when we're talking, it's not out of our own individual, personal negativity. What we're speaking is out of the experience, the right experience of grace. Giving thanks in all circumstances is simply the learned ability to see the unshakable goodness that is around us, that is not circumstantial, that is there actually in all circumstances, and to name it, to speak it out, to say it, to call it forth in each other, to name it in one another and in our world, so that we're able to speak the truth. Thanksgiving is the language of love. Thanksgiving is the language of truth. Thanksgiving is the appropriate response, the natural thing that happens when we see the world as it is. It means we gain the ability to see everything in life as a good gift from God, and then to speak that language to one another. Giving thanks is simply learning the language of love. Now, of course, because of our negativity bias, this language of love is never our native tongue. We grew up in homes in which blame and shame and anxiety and lies were told to us, and we begin to tell them to ourselves. Lies about who we were and how the world is. And a good portion of life is unlearning those lessons, unlearning that original language. It should not be a radical thing to say at the heart of things, you are created in the image of God, and that God called you very good. In fact, we get pushback about this very message all the time. People think that in saying that we are trying to go light on people or to go light on sin or trying to water down the message by just being positive and saying the things that people like to hear so that people will come to church and we aren't telling them the hard truths in life. Paul, by the way, got that same kind of critique in the church in Galatia. Those folks would say that we need to tell people the truth. And in their minds, the truth is that they are sinners at the core. But we believe that no, there is a more fundamental and truer truth. In fact, that we are telling people the truth. That this is the more scriptural way to see one another and God's world. The problem is we have blinders on. We can't see it. And then we can't live into it. But if we truly saw the goodness in one another, if we truly saw the gift of grace that permeates everything, if we gained the ability to see the goodness of God all around us, if we truly experienced it and held it and soaked it in and rejoiced in it and prayed through it and gave thanks for it, then it is doubtless that we would also gain the ability to call forth that goodness in one another and to live the lives of joy that God intended in natural rhythms of prayer. to learn how to speak the language of love. We would learn to express thanksgiving and to speak the language of grace. But this language is not our original language. We have learned to speak in other ways. And so we must all learn to speak this new language to one degree or another. And that's because our brains have it all wrong, and they need to be retrained. They're retrained by rejoicing and praying and giving thanks. One final note about our negativity bias. It's estimated that if you add up all the emotional words in the English language, about 2/3 of those words describe how we feel in negative terms. They describe a negative emotion. Only 1/3 of our feeling words are positive. We have twice as many ways to describe when we're having a bad day than if we're having a good one. And this is yet another example of why prayer is such an important tool for us. It gives us more language. It gives us a way of expressing ourselves outside of words. It gives us a tool to engage life. Eugene Peterson writes, "At the center of the whole enterprise of being human, prayers are the primary technology. Prayers are tools that we use to collaborate in God's work with us." And so, as you get ready to experience Thanksgiving, and as you tell stories of God's goodness, and as you recognize that goodness in people around you, as you take time to slow down, and as you take time to hold maybe a little more closely God's good gifts to you, may you gain the ability to see those gifts of God all around you. May your prayers rewire your brain, and may your thanksgiving speak the language of love this world so desperately needs to hear. Amen.